Hey everybody, after last week's container maintenance video, you made it abundantly clear. You want to know what kind of fertilizer I use, how much, and how often. So today, I'm going to lay it all out there, tell you exactly what I do, also give you maybe a little bit of my strategy behind fertilizing, and hopefully that'll give you a little bit of extra information that might help you make some decisions on how you want to fertilize, because there are plenty of ways to get nutrients into your plants, and so it's all going to be dependent on kind of your personal choices, but these are the choices that I've made, and I've been happy with the results so far. So the primary way that I get fertilizer into these plants is with a water-soluble fertilizer. So this means it's a powder or the crystals that you mix in with your water, dilutes in there, and then you just water your plants like normal, and all that food gets to those plants. So it's a pretty easy way to do it, gets the nutrients they need, and these varieties of fertilizer have been specially designed for annuals, because annuals are kind of like these beasts that, like, they're superheroes in the sense that they have been bred to produce more flowers, more foliage, get bigger than normal. And so we use it for these. We do not use this kind of fertilizer really on our perennials and our shrubs and trees. They don't need this kind of fertilizer. Now, if you get some fertilizer on them, or you do it, 2 or 3 times a summer with Miracle-Gro or whatever you're using, not a big deal, but it's really intended for these annuals. So I want to really emphasize that, because if you start using it on all your perennials, you can actually hurt your perennials. They don't need that kind of feeding, and they can kind of grow different, and it's not a great thing. So stick to your containers, and you can also use these techniques for your annuals that you plant in the ground as well. So keep that in mind. So the brands that I've used, and I've used a couple in the past. This year I'm using Beat Your Neighbor fertilizer for all the containers in here. And so far I've been very happy with it. You can tell, I've had pretty good success so far, and it's easy to use. It's kind of your basic kind of thing. What I like about them, so they're a little bit more concentrated, so their scoop is a little smaller, and their ratio is 1 scoop to 1 gallon. And that's very, very nice, because most of our watering cans are, 1 gallon or 2 gallon, or I use a 5-gallon bucket sometimes. So very nice to be able to just measure it out. Then I just water, and I do that once a week. So you pick a day, that's the day you do it, and you water like normal. So I just make sure, actually I shouldn't say you water like normal, because I actually try to make sure that I give them a pretty good dose of water on that fertilizer day. So a lot of times I'll maybe do a little bit more than my average day, but not too much. I don't want them to just be sitting in wet fertilizer or anything like that. Now, other brands that I've used, I have used Miracle-Gro. This is probably the easiest to come by. So this is a big bag, comes in smaller containers as well, and I've had great success with this stuff as well. They have a different kind of scoop. So this is this scoop here is 1.5 teaspoons or tablespoons. And so you end up using a little bit more fertilizer in here, and their ratio is 1.5 scoops to 1.5 gallons, which is, like, I'm sure whoever did this, it was a marketing person that decided this, not like a practical gardener. Now, they do have a line on here that shows where the 1 teaspoon mark is, but the granules on this, it's not like sugar or salt where you can like scoop it and then dump some out and level it out and see. It's like they kind of stick together, so you kind of got to scrape it away. It's a little bit frustrating, but we all manage, but somebody wasn't thinking when they did this. The little scoop is if you're doing inside plants, and even that is like a 1/2 teaspoon or something like that. So it's kind of strange how they did it, but this one works as well. I've just real briefly, I'd used the Proven Winners variety, which is really nice. Now, they advertise that they have iron supplement in there, so if you have a high pH water, that one will automatically kind of negotiate your pH and help your plants out that way, so that you don't have to add supplemental iron or do other things to compensate for like high pH in your water. I don't know about the other ones if they have that or not, but Proven Winners specifically says, hey, we're good for those kind of situations. So that's something to consider. And I've also used Jax, and Jax is actually what we use in our retail space, especially at the beginning of the season. We start with the Jax Petunia feed, and then we switch to the Bloom Booster later. I will say that Miracle-Gro does come in like a regular and a Bloom Booster. I haven't seen a huge difference when I use the Bloom Booster. And part of it might be because I have quite a few petunias, and petunias don't need that Bloom Booster. They just need regular fertilizer. But in general, my plants have done well with either one. So if you're out there and one of them's cheaper than the other, go ahead and use the cheaper one if you want. Or if you feel really committed to trying the Bloom Booster, go ahead and do that. I don't know that you're going to notice a huge difference. The important thing is that you're watering properly and that you're fertilizing regularly. That's going to get you the best results. So what else can I tell you? So those are the 4 brands that I've used. Frequency, 1 time a week. So I pick a day of the week, and that's when I do it. And like I said, they say water regularly, but I sometimes, give them that little bit of extra water just so that they have that extra reserve in there. That's just I think it just helps with my brain. That's kind of how I think. No matter which brand you use, I encourage you to follow the instructions on the container for how much to mix in. Don't do the whole thing where you're like, another scoop, it won't hurt. A little bit more of a good thing. Don't do that. Just follow the instructions and stay the course as far as how much to mix in there. If you need to kind of amplify your fertilizer, or if you want to do a little bit more, I would recommend fertilizing more frequently rather than increasing the potency of your fertilizer. And most of the containers will say once a week or once every other week. I think you can do either. And to be honest with you, you could do these every other week and your results may be similar, or you might not notice a huge difference. So that's something to keep in mind, that if you're kind of noticing like, whoa, this fertilizer stuff is pretty expensive, you could always pull back a little bit and just see, and then wait and see if your results change, or if the quality of your plants is going down, then you can amp it up again. So that's another thing that you can experiment with. Kind of listen to your plants, kind of decide like, hey, you guys are doing great. Let's just keep you going, and we'll pull back on the fertilizer and see if they respond differently. Now, last week I did mention some wave petunia baskets that I was trying to revive. They had gotten really leggy. There had been a big empty spot in the middle, so I'm doing some experiments to see how I can get those to revive and fill out again. And what I'm doing with that is I'm increasing the amount of fertilizer, or the frequency of how often I'm fertilizing. So on those, instead of once a week, I was doing those every other day with fertilizer. So watering, making sure that they were consistently watered, but I was fertilizing every other day. And I do that for about a week. So I do that every other day for a week, and then I start pulling back. So once I start seeing the results, that's usually when I start pulling back on the fertilizer. So I might then do it, twice a week, and then I go back to my once a week schedule. It usually works out really well, especially with plants like petunias, verbena, calibrachoas. A lot of times, they do pretty well with that extra dose, and they kind of come back to life for us. So that works. But one thing that can happen is once you do that, you can get addicted to fertilizing. So you start doing this every other day thing and you see results, and suddenly you're like, oh, look at this. I've got like blooms coming out of everywhere and this is going to be crazy. And so then you're tempted to constantly be fertilizing your plants. And your plants will probably do great. They will just produce more and they'll get bigger and bigger. But in the long run, you're probably going to be disappointed at the end of the season. You're going to have them so overgrown that you're going to have a little bit more maintenance down the road. You're going to probably have to do a trim back at some point. So you don't want to push them too hard unless like, hey, I've got a graduation party in 3 weeks. So then I'm going to, spend the last 2 weeks really giving them a lot of food. That's a little different story. But to say like until through September, I'm going to just keep getting them more and more food, not a good idea. And there is a certain point when too much fertilizer can be added, and that can also damage your plants as well. So try to stay the course. Don't fall for it. I've done it. I've been like, gosh, these things just are producing more and more. And then I get like the Frankenstein container where the flowers are so huge that they're actually getting unruly in some ways. So anyway, I'm digressing a little. I'm just trying to tell you the addiction is real. Now I have to admit, I do have a bit of supplemental fertilizer that I use, and that are the time release pellets like the Osmocote, and it's usually the numbers on it are like 10, 10, 10 or something like that. And when I plant these out, I do put that in there, and that's kind of my catch-all. So in case, throughout the season, maybe I'm a little lax with my fertilizing, or I'm just not on my schedule yet, I know that no matter what, they're still getting that little bit of time release fertilizer that gets released each time I water. And so I find that that's kind of just my safety net. Also, a good time to use it would be like if your neighbors are going to water for you while you're gone for 2 weeks or something like that. Asking your neighbors to water for you is a big ask. Asking your neighbors to water for you and fertilize, that can be a little bit unreasonable. So before you go on vacation, just put those granules in there, and you can skip the water-soluble fertilizer for that time when you're gone, and then you can get back on schedule when you come back. And that time release is just going to help hold them over, for that amount of time. It's just something that I do. I'm in the habit of doing it, and so I don't even know what they would look like if I didn't. They might be the same, because in general, I'm pretty good about using my water-soluble fertilizer. So since I'm consistent on those, I might not actually need the time release, but I do it anyway. I just feel like I need the safety net. So that's another little bit. Now, along with fertilizing, watering is very important. And I know sometimes when I talk about watering, I make it sound like all my plants are like Goldilocks, where, oh, they don't like it too wet, oh, they don't like it too dry. But the reality is that the range of tolerance for these plants with the moisture is pretty broad, but I'm always thinking about those extreme situations and those extreme people because they're all out there. And so there are people who basically keep their soil really soupy all the time, and then they don't understand why their plants don't work. And then there's other people who keep them really dry and they don't understand why their plants aren't thriving. And so it's just important, keep them consistently moist is usually the easiest way to go. I do tend to get a little lax with like my geraniums and my begonias. I let those dry down quite a bit. And like calibrachoas, when I can, a lot of times I'll let them dry down quite a bit. But if they're in a mixed pot with everything else, I just keep it consistent. You know, I just keep kind of a even amount of moisture in there. But part of the reason why this works is because I do have bigger pots too. And it's much easier to keep the moisture consistent if you have a little bit bigger pot and less plants. So that makes it so much easier, because when you have a small pot with lots of plants in it, it basically can go from pretty wet to really dry because all those plants are sucking up the moisture, so you need to be much more on top of it. Last week I had mentioned those wave petunia baskets that were starting to need to be watered twice a day, and that doesn't really work with my schedule. I tend to be a little bit lax when it comes to the second watering. Great about getting that one watering in, and I tend to keep it in the morning around the same time, but sometimes that second watering I might get in here at 4 o'clock, or I might get in here at 8 o'clock. And yesterday is a prime example. Got in here and it was late. It was probably 8 o'clock, and I was like, oh, I got to check them. Those wave petunia baskets, I mean, one of them was starting to kind of do the whole little bit of a wilt type of thing. And I thought, my goodness, had I not come in and done that second watering, they would have been in pretty bad shape tomorrow. Probably wouldn't have killed them, but they would have taken a long time to recover. And I probably would have ended up with even more spindliness and a lot of not goodness with that container. So I like to make sure that my containers are bigger. So I am going to pot up those wave petunias. I'll show you how I do that as well, because I think it is important that you consider it. It might not be an option for you depending on, you know, your yard and how your containers are, but it is something to consider, that if you can't keep up on watering, you need to find some solution. And sometimes it's potting up, sometimes it's finding ways to get supplemental water in there, whatever it might be. So that's going to be important. So I'll show you guys that at the end of the video. Now, people have given me some tips on watering that I don't subscribe to. So I'm going to tell you what those are, because like the number one tip that I've gotten that I don't really agree with are the people who say, oh, I just water until it starts dripping out the bottom. That's how I know it's done. And you have to remember that if there's water pouring out the bottom, there's also fertilizer being poured out. There's all these nutrients that were in the soil being washed through it. And it's just not good for the plant. That's one reason. Number two is that if your plant gets really, really dry, and that soil gets really dry, it becomes hydrophobic. So you could have a container that I would normally maybe put 4 cups of water in. I put a half a cup in and it just runs right out the bottom. So if I'm just watering it till it comes out the bottom, if that container was really dry, the water's going to go through and there's not going to have any time for it to absorb. So if you're in that situation where it's really dry, you add a little bit of water and then you leave for a while, come back, give it a little bit more water, come back. Now, it can be an indicator when you notice it drip a little out the bottom. Sometimes I'll go to that, length, and then I go, oh, better stop. So that's important that you don't follow that. And then the other tip that someone said is, oh, I always wait until my plants dry down and they start to show signs of wilt. That's when I know it's time to water. And I think putting your plants under that stress every single day is not great for your plants. So, I mean, maybe it works for them, but it would not work for me because these plants are not made to kind of always be in that water stress every single day and then bounce back. And then, I just don't think it's good for them. So I'm not going to do it that way. A lot of these plants, if they are under water stress, will bounce back. So that's great, but I don't want to do it day in and day out. Also, the big problem with that is if you miss that window of getting them hydrated again, you can lose those plants. So once they show signs of wilt, I mean, that's the first stage of, hey, I'm dying here. And they will die if you don't get them water or you don't, take care of them. So I'm not going to go into that realm. I just can't do it. These poor plants, they look too good for me to let them wilt down. It doesn't make sense to me, but that's how my brain works. In the past, I have talked about the fact that we have high pH in our water here, and that high pH can have an effect on our plants. So over time, high pH makes it so that these plants can't take up all the nutrients that they need. Usually the biggest sign is the leaves start to look very yellow, and a lot of times you'll even see veining where the yellow is starting to show up and the parts of it are a little bit green, but you're getting more and more yellow. And then over time, if it continues, they just start to diminish in quality. So the flowers get smaller and fewer. It gets just not very attractive. It might not die, but it doesn't look very good. So I've talked about how we add iron or chelated iron, and there are a lot of products on the market. We use one called High Yield, and for that one it's like we take like a quarter teaspoon, and we kind of put it more towards the edge of the pot, and then we just water it in, and that usually remedies the problem pretty quickly. There's other ones too. There's liquid ones. There's a lot of products out there. There's even some that they recommend spraying on like petunias and things. I've tried it, but I didn't really see results, so I don't know if maybe it's just more of a preventative thing or what it is, but it didn't really work for me. So we found that the high yield works for us, so that's what we use. But then also like calibrachoas, because they're so sensitive to pH, we don't even put them in the landscape. And that's the case with in a lot of places. If we put them in our landscape, they will turn yellow so fast, and trying to keep up on iron when there's that much of an issue, it's not worth it. So we don't bother with those in the landscape. And I guess I should talk about landscape plants. When it comes to the annuals, when I plant them out there, I usually fill a 5-gallon bucket with the fertilizer. Then I just take my little measuring cup and I just kind of pour, and usually it's a 4-cup measuring cup, and that's usually just what I pour on top of it, unless it's really dry, and then I feel like, oh, I better give it a little bit more. But that's kind of how it just ends up for me. Sometimes though, towards the end of the season, when a plant is just huge, like if I have a giant salvia, that's going to get maybe 8 cups of water, but there isn't like a magic measurement that's going to just be perfect for all your plants. You're going to have to gauge, how dry the soil is, how big the plant is, kind of where it's planted, whether it's, in a container or out in the landscape. You're going to have to just listen to your plants and get used to kind of how it goes. With hanging baskets though, I'm always checking the water in moisture by the weight. And even with some of these, I get used to kind of lifting them on the corner there, and I'll know when it's lighter than normal. And when it's lighter than normal, I know I've got to get a lot of water in there. And a lot of times on those days, I'm like, oh good, it's on fertilizer day too, so I'm giving them extra fertilizer. Again, I play with my mind a little bit with these things. The plants probably aren't too worried about whether it's fertilizer day or not, but I like to think that they're going to really love what I'm giving them. Let me get those wave petunia baskets planted up, because that is something I want to get done right now. Okay, so here and here are my problem children, but they are very well behaved right now. So these were the wave petunia baskets. They were getting really leggy. They had big holes in the middle. They just weren't looking very good. So I did 2 different things. On this one, I had trimmed them back right to the edge of the pot. And this one here, I just let it go. And both of them I've been fertilizing every other day. Well, I did it for a week. And then after a week, I noticed that they were showing signs of improvement. And so then I cut back to doing it then twice a week this last week. And now I'm just back on my regular fertilizing schedule, and they are so happy. I mean, this is so nice to see this beautiful kind of full sender, and it's filling in more and more as we go. We're also starting to see it kind of extend out, and it's going to start trailing pretty soon. So we're going to have good coverage on there. The one that I didn't trim back is looking fantastic too. So I've got a lot of new growth coming from the top, new growth in here, new flowers showing up. So either way, I think this one is probably going to have a really nice habit in the end. It's going to be very even. This one seems to be coming around though, so I'll be curious to see how they do. Now the big problem I have now is that they're needing to be watered twice a day, and I'm getting very nervous about that because I could very easily miss watering, and every day they're getting lighter and lighter when I come in here. So I've got to get them into something bigger, because I don't want them to be dependent on that second watering if possible. And I'm hoping that bumping them up from a 12-inch pot to this bigger 14.5-inch pot is going to be kind of my secret. And hopefully it's enough. I was tempted to even go even bigger and put it into like a 19-inch or something like that, but then I was like, no, just do it this size. This is what we're going to do. This one comes with this little screen in here that kind of prevents the soil from falling out of the drainage holes, but if you don't have that in yours, don't worry about it. So what I do first is I put a little bit of soil on the bottom, and I do like to give it a little pack, and I do pre-moisten the soil when I'm doing this, because you'll see I end up kind of packing these in, and I need them to be able to, I need that soil to be able to be a little bit more able to compact. I can't do a dry powdery one. So what I do is I just put it in, and I kind of make sure that the 2 rims line up. So right now the smaller pot is maybe just a little bit higher than this one. I think that's going to be fine. So then once I do that, I keep it in here, and the reason why I'm starting with this one, because it is a lot easier when you're containers like this. Otherwise it can be pretty difficult when you've got a lot of branches on it. So I don't want to mess with that one quite the same way. So all I'm doing is I go through to the different sides, and I just pack in some soil along the edge of the pot. And it's a little bit time consuming and a little bit of a pain, but it's worth it for me, because in general, well, especially with that one behind me, is going to make it a lot easier for me to be able to transplant it without damaging the plant at all. So getting these in, And then a lot of people ask me, where do I get that pot? And this is just a pot we carry. It's our standard 14-inch pot, and it's called a Seneca pot, but I don't know who else carries it or whatever, but any larger pot will do. So you don't have to have this special, you know, special white pot or something like that. You just need to get it, you know, into that bigger size, and your plant will thank you for it. And I also have had people ask, like, well, why are you just using white containers or such plain containers? And the fact is, there's a couple reasons. Number one, those fancy containers cost money, and I really want to focus on the plants here, so that's where my priority is. If you want to put them in fancy pots, that's fine. You know, wire baskets or, you know, cocoa liner baskets, whatever you do, that's great. But that's just not where I'm at with this. So so I don't want to go, you know, fancy. And you can see I'm already breaking off pieces, but that's fine. I'm not going to be panicked about that at all. And you know, now when I'm packing it into these little corners and things, I'm like, maybe I should have gone bigger, because if I would have gone bigger, then I definitely would be able to, it's really easy to get them packed in, whereas the more, the closer they are in size, the harder it is to get in there. So now I just go through and I give it all a good push. I still got to get quite a bit more in here, so it's not quite even. There we go. So let me just work on this a little bit, and then I'll show you the next step. Okay, now I'm pretty happy with the amount of soil that I have in there. So now I'm just gonna pop out that one there, and then I basically have a little bit of a well that I'm gonna use to plant this one in, or to pop this out. So this is where it gets a little difficult, just because you got to be really careful, and it's going to be really hard with that other one. So I hope I don't mess it up, but I feel like it's going to be better for it to do it that way. So I just flip it over, then I gently remove this, and this one has one of those discs in it too, so I'll pop that out. And then we're just going to go like this, and there we go. And now I'll just try to make sure it's as even as possible. So I'm just running my fingers around there. Boy, I did this one pretty well. There's a nice even path on there, and if you look at this, you really can't tell that, you know, this wasn't started in this one, but that little bit of extra soil, and actually when you think about how much soil, I added this much plus soil. So it may not look like a lot, but there actually is quite a bit more soil, and that's going to hold a lot more moisture. And hey, if later on in the season this thing is sucking up water again and even more, and I need to pot it up again, I could do that, but I probably won't. At that point, I'll just have to figure something else out. So now, time to try this other one, and this is where it gets really complicated, because with those big arms, ooh, it's going to be tricky. So what I want to do is get this in. Now, some of my leaves and things fell, and I don't like to put those in the soil at this point. So let's get this going. I might need a little more soil. So that's in there. And then for this one, I'm going to use my empty pot, because this is way too hard to try to maneuver with. So we're just going to put this in here, and this is going to be so much easier than what I was just doing. So I'm going to put some in, and I just kind of go around. And I haven't found a real elegant way of doing this, and nice tidy way. So if you're probably watching going, oh, that soil's falling all over the place. Oh, what's he doing? Well, sorry, but this is how I roll right now. It's about getting it done. So get that in there, and then I just keep kind of pushing this down. I can go a little bit up with this, because I did notice that these kind of were planted a little deep, or the soil kind of settled a little, so it wouldn't hurt for them to be a little higher than before, but not too big of a deal either way. Okay, now for the hard part, getting that big monster into here. So if I fail, I'm going to fail right here in front of you. So I'm taking the risk, but I'm willing to do it. You guys will be forgiving if this goes bad, right? So I guess first I'll take off the handles. So we've got to be really careful with all these branches in here. Oh boy. And this one is super light. And that's one thing you're going to notice, is that the more foliage and flowers on these plants, the more water they're going to need. So you need to pay attention to that. Okay. Wish me luck. Okay, hand in the middle. The one nice thing is that this one is really, really light right now, so because it's really dry. And look at all those roots on there, they're pretty dry at the bottom. So now we're just gonna drop that in. Oh, please work, please work, please work. Okay, so it's a little crooked, but ooh, that was a nice fit. I got lucky on this one because I don't always manage it quite so well. So now I'll just snap the handles back on. Whew. Okay, so I'm gonna hang this back up and yeah, look at that. I mean, this thing is just doing fantastic. I suppose since this is a fertilizing video, I should show you how I fertilize. So basically, let's say I usually do this on the ground. So let's see how well this goes. So usually I just start filling my bucket and then get my fertilizer out. I got a little yellow scoop on this container. And then this is a 5-gallon bucket, so I'm gonna use 5 scoops. Okay. Always keep these sealed up because they definitely absorb water. That's kind of their job. And then I let this fill up, and then I usually use my little cup to pour it in. I just found it's easier than constantly filling out a, what do you call it, a like watering can. That just works for me. Also, I can kind of carry the bucket around on a wagon. Sometimes I have, when I have a lot of them, like when I feed the ones at the end of the driveway, I have 3 buckets, and then I'm able to just scoop it out. I just find it a little easier. Okay, so just a case of filling this up, and then like this one I'm gonna just probably put 1 of these 4 cups in there. Yeah, that's pretty heavy already, so that should do the trick for that one. Meanwhile, this other one was really dry, so I'm gonna give it 2, I think, and hopefully I don't overwater it, although it'll be fine. I'll be able to tell tomorrow morning how much it needs, but that should do. I think I might just do 1.5 because I don't want to overdo it, and they'll be watered in the morning. I won't be, this isn't actually my fertilizer day, but I figure these, they can use a little extra. So, but tomorrow I'll just put them back on the regular schedule where they'll just get watered regular, and then when I do fertilize, I'll keep on that kind of schedule there. So thank you guys for watching. I'll talk to you soon.